Rich Tehrani here with TMC. We are at Cloud Expo 2012 at the Jacob Javits Center in Manhattan. On our program is Sandy Steir. He is with 1010 Data. Sandy, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for talking to me.
So you're, just for the record, you're CEO and co-founder, correct?
That's correct.
And when did you found the company?
We founded the company in 2000.
Wow, and you're a big player in cloud and analytics, right?
We were probably the original player in cloud and analytics. In fact, when we started, there was no such thing as the cloud. It existed, but it wasn't called the cloud. It was basically the internet.
Back then, we called it ASP, so it was an application service provider, right? Because we went through I don't want to bore the viewers, but we went through a few incarnations of on-demand and hosted and as a service, and then eventually we all agreed upon cloud. But you obviously were not only an early player, but you've persevered for over a decade in a field which now is one of the hottest in tech. Why is it that you were successful where so many other companies just didn't make it through?
Well, I think, first of all, we did persevere. I think that we actually were fairly successful from, relatively successful from the start. We got a customer, got another customer, and slowly but surely we built up our customer base. We did not overextend ourselves. We were not a venture-backed, high burn rate kind of company. We basically, we spent money as we made it, and so we grew very organically. The more customers we brought in, the more we were able to spend on marketing and the more we were able to sell to more customers, but it was a very natural progression. Now we've got hundreds of customers, but it took a while to build up to that.
So generally speaking, what do your customers have in common? Is it a need to go through large amounts of data and analyze that data and try to find nuggets of information, or is there something more to it?
No, I think it's exactly that. I think that our customers all have a lot of information or have access to a lot of information. It's important to note, in fact, this is something that I don't think people talk about too much, but in the big data area, not every player in the big data area is a company that produces big data. A lot of companies, could be small companies, that need to use big data that are produced by other people. And so we have a combination of that. So everybody, as you say, is involved in big data, or at least large data, and they all need to analyze it. And what they have in common really is that it's cross-industry. It is, there's nothing special about one particular industry and the other. I mean, some industries maybe have more data than others, but I think the need is there and throughout the entire business world.
And it seems to me with the amount of information on the internet growing exponentially, that the ability for new, innovative, small companies using services like yours and tapping into those streams of information to come up with new business models. I mean, it sounds like there's this infinite potential for that to take place, right?
Yes, in fact, the most infinite potential, and that I like to talk about because it is the biggest idea, is the idea that companies should be sharing data with each other. So it's interesting when one company has a lot of data that they need to analyze. That's nice, and that's interesting, and there's a clear need, and it's a growing need. What's even more interesting, though, is when companies begin to share data with each other. And I would argue that a company that collects a lot of data in one industry, that data will invariably be interesting to somebody else in some other industry, perhaps. Telecoms data that tracks people's movements, who they talk to, would be phenomenally interesting to a retailer and other kinds of people. A retailer's data is phenomenally interesting. We have actual use cases of this. Is very interesting to the manufacturers, so Procter & Gamble and Coke and Pepsi and all those guys. They can look at the retailer's data and really find out more about the market than they could possibly do otherwise. And so the idea of sharing data, even big data among companies, I think is really in its very earliest stages. We're very fortunate to be involved in that, but I think that's really the early stages, and going forward, that is going to be a much bigger part of the story.
Agreed, and one story that I've heard from another company that I spoke with a couple months ago in the cloud space was retailers working with telecom companies and credit card companies to minimize fraud of credit cards. So basically having a program that alerts a customer if their cell phone doesn't happen to be in the department store where it's being used, just to make sure that it's an authorized transaction. I mean, there's billions of dollars of credit card fraud, so what if you could take that number and dramatically decrease it? There's obviously huge potential there.
Yeah, and that's a great example. Most people, when they do that now, the idea of sharing data between companies is not very new, but it's always been done in a very narrow way. There's some particular need. Maybe it's credit card fraud detection. Maybe it's inventory management. There's always a narrow need that needs to be filled, and so portals have been built that allow one company to see something about what's going on in the other company. But those are very narrow portals. They all require a lot of specialized development, and what I'm talking about really will take that further. The idea here is that companies should be able to share their data in a completely open way. So, imagine that I'm a company that has a lot of data. I just put my data up in the cloud. The cloud is a great place for this. In fact, I think this is where the big data and the cloud really come together. So the cloud is a great place. You put your data in the cloud and then allow other people to get at it. And then there's a whole story as well, how do they actually get at it? How much do they need to know about your database to do that? And we have a whole story at 1010 Data about that. I don't want to turn this into a sales pitch necessarily, but there is a story there. But if you can allow that, if you can allow one company to...
In a secure manner, right?
In a completely secure manner. Yes, each company, the owner of the data has complete control over who can look at that data. Obviously. But if you allow that, if I as a data owner can put my data in the cloud and allow other people to get to it, people that, they may be in a completely different business than mine, and I may not have any idea what they want to do with the data, but I know they're interested in it, or they may be interested in it. If you could accomplish that, that's a tremendous step forward. And in fact, I might be able to, the most obvious benefit to me as the owner of the data is I can get people to pay for it. And so I may not be I may be a retailer, I may be a telecom, I may be, I may be a utility, but suddenly I can make money off of my data asset where I could not make money off of it before. That could be a potential interesting, revenue stream.
So how do companies find out more about 1010 Data?
Well, you can go to our website, obviously, www.1010data.com. That's 1010data.com. There's contact information there, phone number, et cetera, et cetera. I would recommend that people give us a call if this is at all interesting to them. And we can get into the details about how we make data sharing between companies easy. Because I think that's really an interesting story, and I don't want to turn this into a sales pitch, but if people do have that type of interest, then by all means, we can certainly give them more information.
Thanks for your time today. This was great.